Please be seated. All right. Very thankful to be home today. Thankful to be with you this morning. It's a blessing. Every Sunday is good, but Cinnamon Roll Sunday, that's where it's at. As I think about the trip I've made from Lubbock to Wichita Falls, many of you have made that many more times than me. Probably the best thing you can say about that is it was an uneventful journey. That's kind of what we want, right? If you get about 5 seconds of, the Cap Rock, and then that's done. If you're really lucky, you may see a deer or a tumbleweed, and sometimes both. And our kids didn't know tumbleweeds were real until they were. Always blessed and thankful for many of God's blessings. Blessed to have a car that makes the uneventful trip. If you're like a lot of us, we're blessed to even have 2 cars. And so if you're like my family, my wife Jenny gets what we'll call the good car, the newer car, and I get the other car. If you're an other car driver, you know what I'm talking about. The other car is the one that you really don't take on road trips. You usually just drive it to work. It's the one that if somebody wants to ride with you or borrow, you've got some disclaimers you got to give them. What's the duct tape and the screwdriver and the coat hanger for? What's missing? What's making noise? And what's that sticky thing in the cup holder? Like there's just some things about the other car that you usually just say, I've got stuff in the back seat. You can't ride with me. It usually solves it. The outside of the car may look completely fine, but on the inside, you're the only one that knows how many of those dashboard lights stay on after you start the car, right? And probably the most unhelpful phrase that I've learned, which is when I pretend to be a car guy, it's probably just a sensor. It's probably just a sensor. You can have 3 flat tires and your car can be on fire, and then you might say, that's just those sensors. They're just doing something. So I think we can probably relate to the fact that sometimes our car may look just fine, but on the inside, we really know that things are just one piece of duct tape away from not being so great, maybe. Sometimes things can look functional on the outside when underneath they're falling apart. And that's what we're going to talk about this morning. Honestly, sometimes that can also be said about people. Sometimes that can be said about churches. And sometimes that can even be said about our own faith. Sometimes things look just fine on the outside, but on the inside, we know that things aren't always going so great. We're going to be in Mark chapter 11 today. I'm thankful for what Shane and what Spencer have shared, and I'm thankful to get to follow along in the Gospel of Mark. So we'll be in Mark chapter 11. We're going to find today in Mark chapter 11, we'll find Jesus entering into a city, a temple, and a religious system that looked very much alive, but things are not always as they seem. Something underneath was deeply wrong. So these events in Mark 11 take place over just a short 2 or 3 day span here. And as Mark 11 begins, we're going to begin with a familiar story which often we call the Triumphal Entry. This is Jesus coming into Jerusalem, and he's about to make his way in. And so that's where we're going to pick it up this morning. If you look with me in Mark chapter 11, beginning in verse 1. As they approached Jerusalem and came to Bethphage of Bethany at the Mount of Olives, Jesus sent 2 of his disciples, saying to them, "Go to the village ahead of you, and just as you enter it, you will find a colt tied there, which no one has ever ridden. Untie it and bring it here. If anyone asks you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord needs it, and will send it back here shortly.'" They went and found the colt outside in the street, tied at a doorway, and as they untied it, some people standing there asked, "What are you doing untying that colt?" They answered as Jesus had told them to, and the people let them go. So Jesus gives his disciples some instructions where to find this colt. He wants to ride this into the city, and he even says, if someone stops you, this is what you say. That's kind of weird. I'll just leave it at that. He didn't say, "Hey, I called ahead. Hey, here's this letter I signed." And I was thinking, it doesn't tell us what 2 disciples volunteered for that. I can see Peter I'll do it. Of course you will, Peter. Maybe James and John, they were kind of a package deal. I don't see Thomas volunteering for this one. I don't know why. It's just something about that. I don't see Thomas, unless I can have visual proof that this colt is actually there. Maybe if you could give me a notarized letter that I could take to the cult people, whoever that is. It's strange, right? But Jesus says, nevertheless, Jesus says, whenever you meet these people, and if you're questioned while you're stealing this colt, let's just call it what it is. If you're questioned, I want you to say, the master needs it. And this wasn't the first time that the disciples had this expect the unexpected moment. This one's pretty tame compared to some of the things they dealt with, right? But as we see in the story, Jesus' words are always true, and I think that's what he's teaching them in this moment, which maybe seems very benign to us. His words are always true, so they borrow the colt, they bring it to Jesus. Let's pick it up in verse 7 as Jesus enters the city. This is Mark 11, verse 7. When they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their cloaks over it, he sat on it. Many people spread their cloaks on the road, while others spread branches they had cut in the fields. Those who went ahead and those who followed shouted, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest heaven." Verse 11 says, Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple courts. He looked around at everything, but since it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. So Jesus rides into Jerusalem, probably a story that many of you have heard before, and the crowd gathers, and sometimes we just focus on what the crowd is saying, but I want us to look a little bit deeper this morning. This crowd is saying the right things. This crowd is shouting things about Jesus as the Messiah, about Jesus as the Anointed One. Listen to what they say to Jesus as he enters the city. Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. When's the last time that was shouted in Jerusalem? They are using Messiah language to praise Jesus, and it's a beautiful thing. But as the rest of chapter 11 unfolds, and as the rest of the gospel unfolds, we start to think, do they really know what they're actually saying? Or maybe more importantly, do they actually believe what they're saying? Because if you've read ahead, spoiler alert, about a week later, that same crowd turns on them. The same crowd that shouted those beautiful things. Don't miss this, because at the very end of that, we have this beautiful scene of him coming in Jerusalem, and very end of that, in verse 11, Mark just mentions this little note that Jesus gets to the temple that night, pokes his head in, looks around, but it's very late, and so he doesn't do anything, and he goes back to join the others. We'll make note of that here in just a little bit. So Jesus has retired for the evening. Let's pick it up in verse 12. Verse 12 says in Mark 11, "The next day as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went and found if it had any fruit on it. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, 'May no one ever eat fruit from you again.' And his disciples heard him say it." I have in my notes, that's weird, right? Again, the disciples have this moment where Jesus is hungry. They're starting off in the morning, and I imagine as they went on the journey, usually you would ask, "Hey, who's got something to eat?" Jesus is hungry. He sees his fig tree. I don't know how often he yelled at trees. I imagine that was unique for them. And also they're like, why is our master doing like that? There's probably lots of why questions, okay? So Jesus is on the way. He sees the tree. It says that he pronounces a curse on the tree. But what I didn't say was Jesus did not curse at the tree. That's a different thing that you need to hear, okay? Basically what it's saying is he pronounces judgment. He pronounces judgment on this tree. May no one ever eat fruit from you again. And so I guess a question as we kind of pause here in the text is, was he mad at the tree because he was hungry? Or was there a deeper meaning? Is he trying to use this tree to symbolize something else that's going to be helpful for the disciples? Or was it really just the tree was in the wrong place at the wrong time? I think was he mad at the tree, or was it used as an example? And I think the answer is probably yes, right? I think he would have liked some fruit, but also Jesus never did anything by accident. He was always one step ahead, leading people to God. Okay, Mark 11, verse 15. Let's continue the story. This is where you think it's got weird so far. This is going to be very interesting. Mark 11, verse 15. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple courts and began driving out those who were buying and selling there. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the benches of those selling doves, and would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. And as he taught them, he said, "Is it not written, 'My house will be called a house of prayer for all nations'? But you've made it a den of robbers." The chief priests and the teachers of the law heard this and began looking for a way to kill him, for they feared him, because the whole crowd was amazed at his teaching. Okay, so this is the next day. Jesus returns to the temple. It's not late in the day, and he doesn't just look around. I think they probably wished he would have just looked around, okay? It says that he began to drive people out of the temple. He turned over the tables. He was even, people as they were carrying merchandise, he was blocking the way. He was not allowing, he was basically trying to shut down the whole system. Why would he do such a thing? And the disciples who still had the remembrance of the strange cult moment and then the tree, this must have really thrown him off, right? Why was, this is out of character for Jesus. Why would he do such a thing? And the result of all this, I don't want us to forget the result of this. What happens because of this? Verse 18 tells us the religious leaders come together, and this is when they began to make this plot to kill him. But why were they going to kill him? Just because he ruined their business? It says they specifically made a plan to kill him because the crowd was amazed at his teaching. I don't want you to forget the moment that Jesus didn't just cause a ruckus because he was just trying to be annoying. He stopped everything at the temple, and then it says he began to teach. He began to teach about the house of prayer, and he began to teach about things that people were always amazed at his teaching. That's what he was doing. So he stops everything. The temple kind of comes to an abrupt stop, and Jesus begins to teach them about what God would want them to know and to practice. Picking up again in verse 19, Mark 11, verse 19. When the evening came, Jesus and his disciples went out of the city. In the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. "Truly I tell you, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in their heart, but believes that what they say will happen, it will be done for them. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. When you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive them, so that your Father in heaven may forgive your sins." So as this story goes, the third day they pass by again and they see this tree. And who is the first person that notices it? Or maybe the first person that just can't help but say something? It's Peter. It's always Peter, isn't it? Peter says, "Jesus, that tree that they pronounced that curse on, it's dead. It says it's withered from the roots." It wasn't just like, "Oh, it needs some water." This tree's gone. Peter notices it and it amazes him. And I think it's interesting and remarkable, the response of Jesus, because Jesus doesn't say, "Told you so," or "How about that? That was quicker than I thought." He has this one phrase that seems to not fit, but I think it does. He says, what did you see what he says there in the text? Verse 22, "Have faith in God." Have faith in God that he'll wither a tree? Like, what? It had to have been strange, right? Have faith in God, Jesus says. And then he goes on to say what that looks like. Have faith in God. Have faith in God specifically in prayer. Have faith in God through prayer. Have faith in God to do great things. Have faith in God for forgiveness. He kind of unpacks something that they should have been learning at the temple when he says, have faith in God. He gives them a specific challenge. And then so as the story unfolds, I'll just paraphrase it here for the rest of the chapter. Guess where Jesus goes back to after this tree is withered? He goes back to the temple. It went so well for him last time that he thought, I need to go back to the temple one more time. And so as he walks into the temple, you can see the religious leaders. They probably saw him a long way off. They're like, really, round three? Like, what is going on here, okay? And they don't know what to do. And so they usually result to the one thing that they feel like will work, but you think they would learn their lesson. But this is maybe early on in the gospel. We're going to trap Jesus in a question. If we can get him to say something wrong, the people will turn on him, and then we will have our power and authority back. And so they kind of surround Jesus, and they come up with this question. They say, Jesus, what authority do you have, and who gave you this authority? They're asking some, where did you come from, and why are you speaking kind of questions, okay? So they come to trap Jesus. What authority do you have, and who gave you this authority? And Jesus has a very simple answer for them, and I think he knows what he's doing, right? He says, I have a question for you first, and if you can answer my question, then of course I'll answer your question. And so Jesus comes up with a question that he knows that they're going to probably spend the rest of their lifetime trying to figure out what are we going to say here. So Jesus' question to these religious leaders is John's baptism. He's talking about John the Baptist. John's baptism, was it from heaven or was it from man? And the text doesn't tell us exactly what happens, but I can kind of picture a huddle. Oh, just a second. We're gonna phone a friend. So they huddle up, right? And they don't know what to say because they're caught. But luckily, Mark gives us a little bit of the conversation. Well, now they're stuck. They say, if we say from heaven, then Jesus is going to say, well, why didn't you believe him? Why didn't you follow him? So we can't say that because that's going to make us look bad. But if we say John's baptism was from man, well, the people think that he's a prophet, and so the people are going to get mad at us and try to hurt us. And so we can't say from heaven, we can't say from man. And so they come up with a great answer. Do you know what they say? They come up to Jesus and they say, you know what? We don't know. And Jesus basically says, well, that's a shame. He says, well, neither will I tell you where my authority comes from. And the scene just kind of ends. And it's just like, these religious leaders can't answer one simple question, or at least it seems simple. But Jesus, the master teacher, knew exactly what to say to continue to do God's purpose and to get rid of these people that were just there to cause problems, just there to try to derail what he was sent there to do. You know, Mark, one of the best things about Mark is it gives you so much action. It's action-packed. The Gospel of Mark gives us a lot of details in a short window of time, and I think it's important for us to see, why did the Spirit guide these kind of seemingly random stories all to be together in this one section? Is there a flow? Is there any connection? As I read over chapter 11 several times over the last few weeks, I couldn't help but get that tree out of my mind, because I know the Triumphal Entry. I can see the flannel graph. I think I've even done a VBS where we laid down things before. I can see that in my head. I know about the temple, but this tree that withered right in the middle of it, it just seems so strange to me, out of place of all these things. And so as I wrestled with it, you may have another question from chapter 11 that sticks in your mind, but as I wrestled with this question, what is the connection to a tree that's not bearing fruit and the temple of God that's not producing faith in him? To me, that was the point. Like, how do I make those things work together? What's Jesus doing here, the master teacher? What is he trying to show us? What's the connection to a tree that's not bearing fruit and the temple of God that's not producing faith in him? And so I think there's several comparisons and connections that we can find between the two of them. Kind of to get back to what we said at the beginning, the tree looked healthy, right? It said it was in full leaf. If you know anything about fig trees, or if you can use Google like I do, you can find out that fig trees have 2 seasons. And if you wanted to know that, then there you go. There's your fig tree trivia for the day. Early in the season, they produce lots of leaves, and they have these tiny little buds. And so if you walked up on a fig tree that was full of leaves, and it had these little buds, you would know that when the harvest came, this tree was going to produce a great crop. And so it says sometimes they would pick those early buds to eat them. I think that's what we're seeing here, because there's kind of a confusing part that it says it wasn't in season. Well, Jesus doesn't curse the tree because it's too early in the season. I think we see that this tree is actually not healthy. So this tree had lots of leaves, but it didn't have these tiny buds. Because if you walked up on a fig tree and you saw all these leaves, but as you inspected it closer, it didn't have any kind of buds on it, then you would know when the harvest comes, this tree looks great, but as you examined closer, you could see it was not worth anything at all. This tree was not going to produce a healthy harvest. In the same way, I think this tree represents the temple. In the same way, the temple looked alive. It looked busy. It looked noisy. It was full of people. But as Jesus looked deeper, he saw some shallow emptiness that broke his heart. There's an interesting verse in Revelation chapter 3. In Revelation 2 and 3, we have this interesting scene where Jesus speaks through John, and he wants to give these letters to the churches. And as he writes to the church in Sardis in chapter 3, he says, "Church, you have a reputation for being alive, but you're actually dead." Can you imagine Jesus saying that to a church? That's what he tells them. He says, you have a reputation for being alive. In Revelation 3, he says that, but you're actually dead. You're busy. You draw big crowds. You're on the news a lot. You're giving us way up. You look alive. You have lots of leaves, I guess we could say, but you're actually dead. Jesus uses this fig tree as a visual to represent what spiritual emptiness looks like. And to me, when that light bulb went off, I'm like, oh, the random tree. The disciples get it? No, Peter is just amazed at how fast it dried up. If it was in Lubbock, that wouldn't have been that big a deal, right? But yeah. So he couldn't believe how fast this tree dried up. But Jesus is using this tree to illustrate a spiritual emptiness that Israel was facing and that individual face as well. Earlier in the Gospel of Mark in chapter 7, Jesus continues some same thoughts. He says, the nation of Israel, he quotes Isaiah 29. He says, these people honor me with their lips, but what? But their hearts are far from me. You see, Jesus, this isn't just a one-time thing Jesus hits on. He uses many different ways to connect to this spiritual truth. Jesus had a lot to say about religious hypocrisy, about people honoring me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In Matthew 23, he says to the religious leaders, he says, you are like whitewashed tombs. You're beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of bones and everything unclean. And so not exactly the nicest thing to say, but he wanted people to know that God focuses on what's inside. Look again at the temple, because I think as we see the progression of the temple, of Jesus' interaction with it, I think things begin to unfold and make it a little bit more clear as to Jesus' motives and his heart for God. So if you back up in verse 11 there, in Mark 11, that's when Jesus shows up at night. He pokes his head in. It's a little bit late. He doesn't stay long, and he leaves. What do you think he saw? What did he hear? What did he feel that night as he just got this first image of the temple? He saw a lot of busyness. He saw a lot of crowds. But what kind of spiritual depth did he see? Do you think he went to bed that night? This is the night before the tree. Do you think he went to bed that night wrestling with, should I go back there? Should I sleep on it? If something ever bothered you, you just go to bed like that? No, I think that was on Jesus' heart. It weighed heavy on his heart and heavy on his mind. And so this next day, as he heads back into the temple, he's hungry, and maybe he's still upset by what he witnessed the night before at the temple. We're not sure. But he curses this tree. He pronounces the curse on this tree for being unfruitful, and then he disrupts the temple for what? For being unfruitful as well. The tree served as a parable illustrating the spiritual condition of Israel. And he's at the temple, and he begins to teach, and he quotes Isaiah, and he says, my house will be called a house of prayer, but you've made it a den of robbers. He has some harsh things for those that he loves because Jesus has a heart for God and for his house. You know, usually when we're studying this text about Jesus disrupting the temple, we talk about den of robbers. Well, yes, history probably tells us that they were cheating people, that they were probably not getting a fair price, that people were coming in poor to the city, and they were just charging an exorbitant amount for people to make a sacrifice. And I think that's true. I think they were being robbed monetarily, but I also think it's fair to say that people were being robbed spiritually as well. The den of robbers Jesus is referring to is not just taking people's money, they're also weakening people's faith and the fruit that they could have been producing at the temple. The whole place, he said, was designed to be a house of prayer for all nations, and they were robbing the people. So as they're walking along the next day, and they see that tree that Jesus has cursed, Peter points it out, Jesus, that tree that you cursed, it is withered, it's gone. What's Jesus' response? He says, have faith in God, have faith in prayer. I think Jesus was trying to instill in those closest to him what the temple should have been instilling in God's people all along. To have real faith, to have a heart for God, to have real spiritual fruit, you have faith in God, and specifically you do that through your prayer life, through the communication that you have with the Father. So I think you can see why Jesus got so upset about the temple, why he disrupted things and why he drove people out. You know, there's another gospel passage that talks about Jesus at the temple, and it says, zeal for your house will consume me. I think there's something powerful in the heart of Jesus when it comes to God's house. So as we close, what's our takeaway? What do we do with this? What do we do with the triumphal entry and the temple and the tree and what seems like kind of random imagery? What do we do with that? And I think where I want to land this morning is this. God is not fooled by appearances. He examines the heart. And I think we see that in so many places in the Old Testament, and we see Jesus illustrating it here in the New. God is not fooled by appearances. He's not fooled by a tree that has lots of leaves. He's not fooled by busyness. He's not fooled by the things that maybe kind of mask sometimes what's under the surface. God examines the heart. And so I think we need to ask ourselves the same question that the church in Revelation had to ask themselves. Do we have a reputation of being alive, but we're actually dead? What about us personally? I think that's a good place to start. Do I put on a good show? Am I busy all the time? Do I look the part? Do I have a lot of leaves on my tree, but I'd be embarrassed if someone looked too closely? Does my car appear to be just fine? But if you rode with me for a while, you'd see that some of those dashboard lights are making some pretty strange noises, right? Maybe that's where we're at this morning as we take an honest inventory and look at our lives. I've learned how to keep the outside looking just fine. I know the songs, I know the verses, I know the church language, I know the things that when people ask me, how am I doing, I can say, I'm doing great. But deep down, I know something's wrong. Maybe as Jesus hints at the prayer life as the key foundation, maybe our prayer life is dried up. Maybe our faith has become routine instead of real. Maybe we're producing a lot of activity but not producing the fruit that God wants. Maybe we look spiritually alive, but actually I feel pretty distant from God. I don't want to leave us without good news, so let me make this statement. The good news of the gospel is this: Jesus did not walk into the temple because he hated the people there. Jesus does not say the things to the church to wake us up because he hates the people here. He walked in because he cared. His anger, it came from love. His zeal came from holiness. He refused to leave people trapped in an empty religion because he knew that real faith in God was possible. That's why the answer to spiritual emptiness is not try harder to look alive. The answer is return to Jesus. And as I think about that, you can always run to Jesus because of a lot of things, but I think of because he's strong and kind. That one kind of sticks in my head a little bit. The answer to spiritual emptiness, Jesus doesn't say try harder to look alive. He says come to me. Apart from me, you cannot bear fruit, Jesus says. Church, God is not asking for polished appearances. He's looking for a heart that truly trusts him. He's looking for faith that prays and faith that obeys and faith that is alive. We're about to sing a song about Jesus as the King, and as we sing that, I just want you to think about the fact that what is something in my life that I need to bear more fruit? Where are areas that I'm trying to cover up and not let people in or not let God in to do the work that needs to be done? The answer is not to try harder to look alive. The answer is to always run to Jesus because he is good.